Good evening. My name is Jennifer Maddox. I coordinate the Kentucky Great Writers Series, which you are watching tonight. And this series features authors who either live in Kentucky or have lived in Kentucky in the past and have one or more works of high literary quality. We're excited to bring this event to you virtually as part of our Carnegie From Your Couch series. And as you can see, I'm on my couch right now in my sunroom. So I'm really grateful to see all of you all here tonight. Though our building is closed due to the pandemic, the Carnegie Center has put almost everything online. So if you're a writer or a reader, some of the things you might be interested in know is that we are still doing writing workshops, seminars, mentoring. The Carnegie Center Author Academy is still going, and we also have manuscript service and much more. And brand new for us is the Kentucky Black Writers Collaborative. Go to our website and check it out for more details. And if we decide to take our 2021 Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame induction ceremony online instead of doing it in person, then go to our website, carnegiecenterlex.org, and you can learn more about that as well. And one of the great things about attending Carnegie Center events virtually, you don't have to live nearby. So we have people from other states. We've even had people from some other countries who have participated in our writing workshops, which is really exciting. The Kentucky Great Writers Series is sponsored by the Wrightsell Cook Foundation, the Kentucky Arts Council, Lex Arts, and we would like to say a special thanks to Nate's Coffee, who has been a longtime sponsor of the series, and to one of our new series sponsors, Eppings on Eastside. We may not be having coffee and baked treats, but we appreciate their support. If you go to bookshop.org, and you'll see the link for the rest of it, the Carnegie Center's page has works by all three of these authors, but while you're there, you can buy anything you want, including more books by each of these authors if you so choose. And one of the good benefits of using bookshop.org is that a portion of tonight's sales will go to the Carnegie Center and a portion will go to local bookstores, and it costs you nothing extra. So we're really excited about that opportunity. Now we'll get started with our readings from our featured authors. And welcome to everybody who's joining us. The first author we're going to be hearing from tonight is Shayla Lawson. It's great to see you, Shayla.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good, good. Yeah. So tell us where you're located right now.
Right now, I am in my apartment in Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn.
Yeah.
It's exciting to have you here.
I'm happy to be back. It's so nice to be back at the Carnegie Center. Yeah, I spent so much time there when I was growing up.
Oh yeah, and that was one of the things I was going to tell people is, you know, you're from Lexington, you're a UK grad, is that correct?
That's correct.
And yeah, and Shayla started out, you know, taking Carnegie Center classes, so really exciting.
Yeah, I think I took my first class there when I was like 13 or 14. So,
wow.
Yeah, we came to Carnegie Center a lot when I was growing up.
You've been around Carnegie longer than I have, and I've been there almost 16 years.
It's true, because you have been a Carnegie Center institution. Yeah, no,
yeah, I've been there a long time, and I remember you from way back in the day when you were teaching with us in the Young Women Writers Project.
Yep.
So yeah.
Classes that I taught.
Now you're teaching, is it at Amherst College?
I teach at Amherst College, yep.
Wow. Well, it's really exciting to have you from Kentucky to New York, you know, and doing some wonderful things there for writers. So let me tell the audience just a little bit more about you. As I mentioned, Shayla came first as a student, then as a teacher at the Carnegie Center, and she came full circle when we featured her debut poetry collection as part of the Kentucky Great Writers Series a few years ago. Since then, this girl's been on fire. She put out 2 more collections of poetry, and then this summer, her collection of nonfiction essays came out through Harper Perennial, and the book's called This Is Major, Notes on Diana Ross, Dark Girls, and Being Dope. And Shayla's going to be showing you that book. It's awesome. One of the most quoted reviews is from her Starred Kirkus review for the book, which said that it is a hilarious, heartbreaking, and endlessly entertaining homage to Black women's resilience and excellence. And, you know, after experiencing this book myself, one of the book blurbs that really resonated with me was from Pulitzer Prize winning author Jericho Brown, who said, "What I love about this book is that for all its mastery of various subjects and genres, it's also searingly honest. This is a brilliant book by a Black woman aware that there's a long history of her special brand of genius, from Phyllis Wheatley to Nina Simone. And now I'm going to let you experience it for yourself as Shayla gives us a reading. Thank you, Shayla.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, so my book, This Is Major, it spends a lot of time ruminating on my years growing up in Lexington, Kentucky. And today I am actually going to share with you an essay that is on theme, but not included in the book. It's an essay that I wrote about watching the death of Breonna Taylor. It's been 200 days since Breonna Taylor's murder, and I can't sleep. It's the same for how I felt ever since the death of Sandra Bland. Every time I see lights flashing behind my car, I don't think, what did I do? I think this is the end. I was 16 in Lexington, Kentucky when I got my driver's license. 2 years older than the girl a policeman in McKinney, Texas, apprehended at a pool party in 2015, grabbing the back of her hair and forcing her down with his grown man's body while she cried in her bikini. The year was 1999. Even without the brutal videos, mothers like my mother knew to warn their daughters to the physical dangers of the police. If you get pulled over, she told me, never stop your car in a secluded area. The first time I was pulled over, I was 22. The same age Rekia Boyd was when she was fatally shot by an off-duty cop while hanging out in the park with her friends. It was 2006, and I'm still living with my parents. I was driving home late at night in my silver Volkswagen Golf after a modeling fashion show at a local venue. The cop claimed I ran a yellow light, but it was 1 a.m. and I had stage makeup on my face. To this day, I'm convinced he thought I was a prostitute. Why didn't you pull over when I stopped you? He asked as I rolled down my window at the Shell gas station a quarter mile from where he flashed his lights. Sir, I said, as I had often seen my father do when pulled over by the cops with us in the car, often on Sundays or Thursdays after our church services, always the same excuse. A car matching this description was implicated in a crime, the real crime being my father, a physician, driving a limited edition Jeep Grand Cherokee in the South. So it's after midnight, and I am a woman in a car alone. I didn't feel safe pulling over in the dark. He made me step out the car. He searched through my car with a flashlight and used the flashlight to search between my legs. Weeks later, I completely froze behind my steering wheel when I encountered the same officer directing traffic for an opera I was attending, Madame Butterfly, with one of my closest friends. He's asking you to move, my friend said lightly from the passenger seat. The officer tapped the hood of my car and smiled, asking me to pass. He didn't even recognize me. I grew up just 100 miles in a basketball rivalry away from Louisville, Kentucky, the city in which Breonna Taylor lived and worked devotedly as an essential emergency medical technician until the day she was murdered. Like Breonna in her 20s, I spent most of my 20s as a Kentucky girl loving shoes, my friends, and helping people. Despite the long hours Breonna put in as an emergency medical technician, she went back to school to become a certified ER nurse's assistant and had plans to start a nursing degree in the fall, this fall. I'm so proud of her when I think of this. She's the kind of girl from my hometown I know well. She was raised like I was. She was raised to find joy in herself, to build up her community, to approach the world with both grace and greatness. We are Black women. We are taught to survive in this world by keeping our heads low and keeping ourselves busy. We are taught to maintain the white fantasy that the world is normal and the hope that we'll make it through with our lives. As a Black woman, I am acutely aware of how disposable I am to white culture. I do not know what the women like Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, Rekia Boyd, Natasha McKenna, Michelle Cusseau, Dominique Fells, Maya Hall, Rhea Hamilton, Alexia Christian, Gabriela Navarez, Chantel Davis, and the myriad of others who have died as a victim of police brutality suffered before their lives were stolen from them. But the world is not kind to us Black women. And so I imagine the record of what I've survived as a snapshot of what so many Black women have, and offer this as a glimpse into our private lives. I've survived childhood molestation. I've survived bullying because of my race. I've survived 17 years of an undiagnosed autoimmune condition, a cancer scare, near homelessness, and an out-of-court workplace discrimination settlement, the stress of which caused me acute renal failure. I have survived sexual assault in 2 separate countries. And while Breonna Taylor was dreaming of getting married, I survived an international divorce. Nobody who meets me would guess that because of this bigotry, I struggle daily to survive severe anxiety and PTSD. I am patient and upbeat. I keep my hair done and wear quality clothes. I teach at an elite college. There is nothing about me that reads to white people as obviously disadvantaged or underserved, because this is the unspoken duty of Black women in this country. We are forced to show up every day as the happy, productive Black girl Breonna Taylor is, smiling beautifully in her EMT graduation photograph. She stands beside an American flag, holding her diploma and a bouquet of flowers. I love her. She is everything in this photograph, the living embodiment of how Black women save lives and protect American freedom, despite those rights being kept from us. In the months surrounding Breonna Taylor's murder, white nationalists across the country have been storming large box chain stores like Target and Walmart, or rioting at state capitals in heated protest against the restrictions imposed by local governors to protect citizens from the pandemic spread of COVID-19. They carry "quarantine is slavery" picket signs, some with images of Black slaves wearing muscles or face harnesses, citing this as a metaphor for having to wear a medically protective mask. They don't come to this they don't come to this comparison by accident. They mean exactly what they say. Our government and its police force have made it abundantly clear that freedom is not for Black people. Long before the 2020 protests against the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, Sean Reed, and George Floyd, the recent nationwide rash lynchings deemed suicides, and the continued escalating death toll. A documentary on the life of Rekia Board reported that on average, the police kill 1 Black woman every month. American anti-Blackness has always been a pandemic. As a Black woman, I have lived my entire life in a state of shelter in place. To read in articles about Breonna Taylor that she dreamed of buying a house breaks my heart. I know that feeling. Although it sounds like a simple expectation, homeownership for Black women means something significant. Putting down roots in the idea you will live into old age, the promise of protection. Although I rent, the early weeks of COVID-19 quarantine before I knew of Breonna Taylor's murder were some of the most peaceful in my life. I bought plants and baked bread. I cuddled into a blanket with my dog and watched movies. I would Zoom conference with my white colleagues, and I wouldn't have to pretend that the world was normal in the ways they always spoke of it, something so alien to me. It was okay if I showed up to this new digital workspace and didn't always smile or have my hair done. It was okay for me to say I did not feel safe. Quarantine was an opportunity for me to let go of some of the stress I had been holding on to. As a Black American, I've never had the freedom to go for a run in my neighborhood, or walk to a convenience store, shop at the grocery store, or check into a hospital, without the act itself being a calculated risk weighed against my chances of survival. Home has always been my happy space. I knew I could survive COVID because what other privileged white Americans took as a complete crisis of faith, I saw as only a modest transition of circumstances. The guarantee of my safety beyond the walls of my home has always been a tenuous prospect in this country, and never really mine. In June 2020, Tamika Palmer amended the lawsuit against her daughter, Breonna Taylor's killers, to include evidence that the Louisville Police Department had a squad dedicated to clearing out the occupied residences of Louisville's predominantly Black Russell neighborhood, namely Elliott Avenue, where development stakeholders wanted the low-income West Louisville neighborhood cleared out to accommodate a high-dollar gentrified real estate development. The kind of neighborhood that would never be built for a woman like Breonna Taylor or me to safely occupy. Although Louisville officials contest the idea the warrant issued that led to the death of Breonna Taylor has anything to do with the city's plans for redevelopment, Breonna lived 10 miles away from Elliott Avenue, the place where the police were targeting in a drug raid on the night of her murder, and had only a passive connection to the person the raid targeted, Jamarcus Glover, an ex-boyfriend of Taylor's, who had already been apprehended by the time the unannounced plainclothes police officers broke down the door to Breonna Taylor's apartment while she and her partner, Kenny Walker, slept. The fact Breonna Taylor's home was still targeted, and Taylor herself referred to as a suspect by the LMPD during the days immediately following her murder, before Kenny Walker's 911 call went public. Somebody kicked in the door and killed my girlfriend, is what a distraught Kenny pleads to the dispatcher. Well, it all suggests that the picture painted by Palmer's allegations is clearer than what the Louisville police want the public to believe. Breonna Taylor wasn't just an innocent victim, she was a casualty, caught in the crossfire of a scheme to make Louisville's drug crime scene look so pervasive that only antidotes for clearing out the less desirable real estate was to begin anew. We've heard this story before, that in order for us to start fresh as a country, to make America great again, some people will have to be removed. To know that I grew up in a state and live in a country where women like Breonna Taylor can be killed in her sleep simply because she's in the way makes it impossible for me to feel peace every time I lay down and shut my eyes. I think of Breonna Taylor and I can't sleep. Who can sleep when a woman saving lives in a global pandemic can be murdered by the police? Over 200,000 Americans have lost their lives in a pandemic, while white nationalists stormed city halls to riot against the quarantine measures made to protect us from it. There are white Americans assaulting other Americans, asserting that wearing a mask is a violation of their freedom. What strikes me the most? Breonna Taylor will not be able to save any of these people, or any more people again. In the midst of a global COVID-19 pandemic in which every essential health worker has been called to the front lines, Breonna Taylor can't be there because she, and not these violent defenders of her inhumanity, are the ones whom the police labeled as our nation's biggest threat. Every time my coworkers see the news and ask me how I'm doing in light of these times, I think of Breonna Taylor. I want to ask them, what do you want to hear? I could say I'm scared, that I'm angry, that I don't feel safe at home anymore, especially when I go to sleep. But we are working on a cure for the coronavirus. How long, how high will the death toll go before America fights back against its anti-Blackness? Thank you.
Thank you, Shayla. As your reviewer said, heartbreaking, searingly honest, and with this piece, absolutely. Thank you for saying words that need to be said, for conversations that need to happen, and for sharing your personal experiences as well. It's heartbreaking. And for those of you all at home, there's a storm rolling in where I live, and I've got a cat nuzzling me too, so I apologize if there's distractions while I'm introducing Michael Croley. Michael, I'm coming from Bourbon County and just north of Lexington today. Where are you from? Where are you located right now?
I live outside Columbus, Ohio. So I was actually trading this thing popped up on Instagram today, and I sent it to Silas because he's always giving me Silas House. He's always giving me a hard time about living here. But it said, stop complaining about your life. There are literally people living in Ohio right now. And so,
oh, Silas. We love Silas.
It kind of feels. So.
Mike and I actually don't know each other like I know Shayla. So this has been fun to get to know you a little bit, for having you in the series, and to learn about you as a writer and as a person. And if you all just heard him talking about Silas House and you heard his accent, well, it's because he's got that Kentucky accent that some of us have. And Michael was born in the Appalachian foothills in Corbin, Kentucky, which has influenced his writing, especially in his short story collection, which he's going to read from us tonight, Any Other Place. And as a result of this collection, he has won the James Still Award for writing about the Appalachian South, and he's won the Weatherford Award. among others. So one Weatherford judge said of any other place, his book, the book captures people at the interstices of identity as they debate whether to leave home or stay. And so no matter what your identity is, you're going to connect with these stories. Like I did. I especially liked one of the characters named Wren Asher, and some of the words that were in that story, where it says, out in the world, away from his hometown, his slanted eyes and dark hair haven't seemed out of place. In New York or DC, he's marked more by his Kentucky accent and the country sayings he picked up around his cousins and uncles. And as someone with an accent, who has experienced that, I understand. Now, NPR also says that the stories in any other place are understated and beautiful and successfully conjure the unease of ordinary people unable to shake the feeling that something in their lives isn't quite right. And so now I'll let you hear from Michael Croley himself.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks everybody for tuning in, and thanks to Shayla for that great, powerful essay. I feel really privileged to be able to follow you tonight. I'm going to read just a little bit of the first story. Actually, Jennifer quoted a line. I don't know if that line will come up or not, but it's just the first 6 pages or so. It's usually a good place to start with the book. So this is a story called Slope. I don't think we'll get this far in the story, but if you don't know, slope is a Korean slur. And so there's kind of a duality to that title that comes in later. Slope. Wren Asher is nearing 30, and over the summer, like his father before him, he's fallen in love with a woman who lives in another country. But that's where all similarities end. For one, Hannah is an American who grew up outside Boston and now lives in Paris. And second, she lives with a boyfriend, a man for whom she moved to France. Wren knew from the beginning getting mixed up with her was a bad idea. And when they parted in August, he thought whatever he felt for her would fade. But since her return to Paris, she calls him every night at 2 a.m. because of the 6-hour time difference. She waits until the boyfriend is gone for work and before she goes to the high school where she teaches English, and then she dials Wren. He likes to be wakened by her voice and sleeps with the cell phone beside the bed so that before he answers, he sees the picture he snapped of her in the metro in DC. It wasn't strange, she asks one night. What? He says. Growing up there. Of course it is now, but not then. It was just my childhood. And it was happy as most, I think. Happier, probably. Her boyfriend is Algerian. She hasn't told Wren much about him, and Wren hasn't asked. One night she told him, I'm drawn to people with backgrounds different from mine. Now she says, but you have so many stories about how backward it is there. It is and it isn't, he says, feeling the need to defend his hometown against the stereotypes about Kentucky. My best friend's parents were the sons of doctors and lawyers, insurance salesmen. I don't know anybody whose father worked in a coal mine, but plenty of them worked at the railroad. It was suburban more than anything else, I guess. I just got a cool accent in the breakdown too. But there's more to it than that, because he knows that while Fordyce is a town and not the country, it's not by any stretch cosmopolitan or refined. Hannah sighs through whatever wires or towers make calls possible anymore, frustrated, it seems, by his answer. He knows she's in bed too, and he tries to imagine the room she's in, her black skirt and silk blouse across the back of a chair, the indention of her boyfriend's head on the pillow beside her. Sometimes, she says, I think you and I are more different culturally than I am with him. She never says his name, though. Though Wren knows it's Henri. On Facebook, he has seen the pictures of them in and around Paris and vacationing at Saint-Tropez. The two of them look happy with the city lights or the blue of the Mediterranean at their backs. And when he thinks about the possibility of a future with Hannah, he thinks he'll never compare with the images on the computer screen. In a race between his love and France, France will win. What do you mean? He asks. I don't know, she says. Yes, you do. You said it. You've been thinking of it. His room is completely dark except for the red glow of numbers from the alarm clock he's turned against the wall, so he can't count the minutes till she calls. It's nothing, she says. Forget I said it. How am I supposed to forget it? It was just something stupid, I said. I don't even really know what I meant. She has dropped the subject, and the only way for them to come back to it is if she brings it back up. For a month, they've been going this way. They met at the beginning of Ren's internship in D.C. last summer. Hannah was teaching in a summer college program and was the friend of a girl in the senator's office where Ren worked. They met in a big group at a bar, and by the end of the night, they were alone, everyone else having begged off for early mornings at their offices. Hannah turned on the bar stool, her crossed leg revealing itself under her summer dress. She edged closer to him, and he ran his fingers along her calf. Is this okay? He asked. She smiled, giving a quiet nod. And this boyfriend you mentioned earlier? The smile disappeared, and she narrowed her eyes. He's not here now. It was only a matter of time. And a week later, when they found themselves in the same bar, cashing out, ready to head home, he felt her behind him. She reached up and laid her hands across his chest, putting her weight against his back, and she felt soft, like 1,000 feathers pressed next to him. He finished signing the credit card slip and held it up to the bartender. Thanks, he called out, and then turned, held her gaze, and took her hand to walk out. Hannah let him lead her through the crowd spilling out of the Adams Morgan bars, and when they were finally on a quiet part of Connecticut Avenue, before a block of row houses, he stopped and stood before her. His heart was beating fast, and sweat ran down his back. Light from a street lamp fell through the leaves of an oak tree, and shadows danced on her face. It'll be a mistake, he said, but she was up on her toes and kissing him before the words were out of his mouth. They caught a cab back to his place, and later, while she slept and he was still awake, sobering up and holding her, he was already giving himself over. He remembers being 8 years old at Kmart and in the checkout line with his mother. It was a bright day, and the sun came through the big panes of glass at the front of the store and bounced off the cars in starburst reflections. He'd asked for a Snickers, but his mother ignored him. She was distracted, looking off toward the automatic doors at some man. She was so lost in her thoughts that the cashier had to call to her. Ma'am, she said, the candy bar. No, she said, and took it from Ren and put it back. She paid quickly and moved toward the man, walking right up to him. Did you lose something in my face? She said. The man looked confused, as if he wasn't sure she was talking to him. Then his mother started in again. You were looking awfully hard for somebody that hasn't lost something. Do I know you? No, the man stammered, but then straightened up, regaining his confidence. But before he could say anything, Ren's mother was done with him. I didn't think so, she said, and took her son's hand. People in Fordyce had always watched her when she came into a store. They'd see her olive skin, her soft almond eyes, the long dark hair, and they'd wonder where she was from, who she was. Before Ren was born, she told him stories about managers following her up and down the aisles of the Dollar General store while she shopped, and grocers at the pick-pack who spoke to her in slow, over-enunciated ways when she paid. Frightened, Ren asked what the man did. He wouldn't stop staring at me, she said. Nobody can look at me that way. Her hands were shaking, and she needed a moment before starting the car. It is Ren's first memory of fear. In the car, he looked at her. His own pulse quickened, worried that if the man had struck his mother, what he, being a boy, could have done to defend her. He hadn't told his parents about the taunts at school. He was constantly being called Japanese or Chinese. Nobody ever guessed Korean. And later, in middle school and high school, he was called Gook and Chink. One boy called him Ching Chong over and over, singing a song about it. But no one ever called him a slope. Something Ren learned in graduate school was the correct slur for Koreans. but he had no idea why one slur was more logical or appropriate than another. In Fordyce, they were all the same. Out in the world, away from his hometown, his slanted eyes and dark hair haven't seemed out of place. In New York or DC, he's more marked by his Kentucky accent and the country sayings he picked up around his cousins and uncles. People sometimes ask him to repeat what he says, as if he's a form of entertainment, and his speech has the quaint air of someone who is simple. The last night Wren and Hannah spent together, he booked a hotel room in Georgetown. He didn't love her then, but that was coming. He had a sense that once they were away from each other, it would be easy for her to forget him, but he pushed that from his mind. They spent the day walking in and out of the shops along M Street, and despite the stickiness of the day, she held his hand, and every so often, when waiting for the light to change across the street, she leaned her head on his shoulder and sometimes kissed his cheek. They followed the towpath along the Potomac, hoping to catch a breeze, but the air was still. Overheated, they started back for the hotel, and then Hannah stopped at a fountain, hiked up her green dress, and stepped over the lip and into the cool water. Wren watched her. She piled all that dark hair of hers on top of her head, giving the fair skin of her neck to the light, and she laughed and smiled at him, splashing him once. "Are you ready?" he asked, but he wanted her to stay in the water just a little longer so he could watch her playfulness. She had the hem of her dress balled into one hand, and traces of light reflected from the water shimmered on her legs. Back in the room, they passed the afternoon in each other's arms, making love with the curtains wide open and then watching bad television and movies, including one set in Paris. "What are the odds?" Wren said. Outside, the sky began to purple, and the sounds of the students out on the quad died out. Hannah was laughing at the movie, telling me how they had spliced the film so all the famous landmarks appeared to be near one another. A little Peugeot zipped past the Louvre and crossed under the Arc de Triomphe, and the Eiffel Tower was almost always in the background. He imagined her in the city, walking its streets, and he thought about his lone visit there, that old European architecture, walls the color of sand, turned dingy with soot and grime, and centuries of history lying in their cracks. In a week's time, they'd be half a world apart, and he wouldn't know her the way he did now, lying next to her, listening to her laugh. The images of Paris reflected off her eyes. The sun had completely disappeared from the sky. And when she saw he wasn't paying attention, she turned to him and smiled, crinkling her nose. Then she switched off the TV, and the room was filled with early beams of moonlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for sharing that story. I'm glad that that's the one that you read aloud for us tonight. I did enjoy reading that story, so it was great to hear you read it. So thank you so much. Jeff, where are you located today?
Prospect, Kentucky.
Prospect, Kentucky, near Louisville.
Yes, outside of Louisville.
Yeah, well, welcome. We're so glad to have you in the series. We've known about Sarah Band Books and the work that you and your wife, Sarah Gorham, did, for literature with that. We've known about your poetry for years, and it's really exciting to have you in the series. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I'll tell our audience just a little bit about Jeffrey Skinner. For decades, Jeffrey Skinner's plays and poems have garnered national and international attention. He's a Guggenheim Fellow in Poetry and received an American Academy of Arts and Letters Award, among other distinctions. In his self-help memoir, The 6.5 Practices of Moderately Successful Poets, he says, "Poets who write poetry and then keep writing it are very brave. The gatekeepers of the arts are all Simon Cowells. You have to be really good just to be invited in from the cold." And any writer who has sent a query letter to a literary agent or to an editor understands about those gatekeepers. But Jeffrey has been invited inside numerous times and has multiple prestigious publishing credits to his name. His latest collection, I Offer This Container, New and Selected Poems, is a distillation of poems pulled from 6 published volumes, some of which we might hear him read from tonight. So I give you Jeffrey Skinner. Welcome.
Thanks. It's nice to be in such good company. And congratulations to the two other authors for very good work. And I'm happy to be part of this. So I'm going to read two poems to begin with that are sort of for my teacher, who was Phil Levine. And he was my teacher and was a very important presence for me at a crucial time in my life. And he became a friend afterwards. So one of his poems that I love deeply is called They Feed, They Lion. And this is called The Lion. You coat yourself in petroleum. You slap your own face at the thought. You throw sticks at the snake in your path. You crack open a golden egg. You stuff 100 in the kettle. You yearn for a phone with black heft. You watch snow falling in the past. You no longer dance alone, so crazy. You thread through crowded rooms. You batten down. You fly upright. You gather fragments of gold shell. You have lost the one most proud. You no longer bait or tease the lion. You feed the lion. You keep him ready. So this one is called Homage to Phil. And I think I connected with Phil because I had a working class background, as did he. And he talked a lot about work, as anybody who knows his poetry knows. And I knew something about it, the kinds of jobs that Phil was talking about. So this is Homage to Phil. I don't know what you know about work, but I can tell you this: thinking is easier. You get up, put on your head, and there you are. Whereas when dawn settles on the factory, you take that great chill inside and it stays. Muscle wakes machine, and both flex together the same way 3,000 times. Then someone else mops another day from polished concrete floors. I'm not saying it's hard. I'm saying my Portuguese landlord had a beautiful face, and when I climbed the stairs, onions were frying, and a language with no sharp edges came from behind his door. Jeffrey, he'd call, come, have wine. But I had serious drinking of my own to do and smiled and said, thanks, not tonight. After the third drink, the onions faded from my shirt, my head blossomed into book and cheap cigar. And Claudius, that bastard who killed father, trumpeted into the room, demanding obedience. And though I knew none of it was real, I also heard the woman inside the carriage making love to a fool. The horse snorted, the carriage flew through my kitchen, then down the drain of night. Rest in peace, Phil. This is called The Field. The fields. Many previous fields were blonde with black stubble, others green with blue stubble and several horses, a black fence for acres. I take on the color of each field and stay alert for predators. Often at night, the moon carves a furrow, as if a bowling alley for ghosts. When I have trouble sleeping, I go out and roll a few frames. Back in my bed, my hands glow, faint silver. It's hard to meditate in the summer field because of wolves and bureaucrats or cicadas grinding grain into dry powder. In one field edged by roses and a marble goddess, I was married. Then in another by a farmer's rack of dead crows, divorced. This was the field where I learned what I would never do, never be. After that came the garden of what remained. I love the field of sunflowers where I too bowed among radiant faces. Each fall, the river field was edged by a stand of quaking aspen or the legs of young women holding a flaming bouquet above their heads. Now, as always, the field extends to the green band of the horizon. We can see the horizon, but not the next field. Once I was such a fool, I imagined myself apart, a spectator watching others working in the fields, or collecting rent, or arguing about sex and other delusions of power. I remember the icy ache, how it froze the mind, until a last piece snapped and I saw clearly there was nowhere else to stand. It was all field. This is called It Was Later. It was later, and after that, later still. It was the smell of dead mouse in the wall. Its hands were tied, alarming the guests. Its name is Legion. It desires you. It's the boy fallen through ice. It's the echoing field between particles. It's age and the deaths and the ghosts. It's a rodent scuttling through walls. It's the burnt toast smell of outer space. It's a barrel from my collection of hats. It's the boy tempting the surface. It's a red line through everyone I love. It's age, and more of it the less to spend. It's desire they tell us to be rid of. No, it's desire that says, I live. A baby left out in the sun. I seem to be writing poems about poetry, which I stayed away from for years, but I think it's a very mysterious process. The older I get and the more I write, the less I understand it. Well, here's a poem called A Baby Left Out in the Sun. The poem continues to embarrass like a baby left out in the sun. Of course, if you leave a baby in the sun, you are liable for more than embarrassment, shame of writing yourself while the universe expands outward to equilibrium. Oh, poem, you fierce baby, riding naked up the funnel cloud, throwing blocks through mirrored office building windows. Is this what happens to poets who leave babies too long in the sun? Everyone sees the mistake, then looks away. Yes, you can wait years for the poem to grow the head of a lawyer. Still, it will be a baby crawling into the sun. The cloud. My mother's been dead for 3 months. I don't know where she is now or how she got there. I've heard all kinds of conjecture, and some I believe. But firsthand experience comes last. Soon I'm going on vacation in Florida, a state she lived in many years. She loved the sun and would lie for hours in its glossy lacquer. Later on, she preferred to stay indoors. Quatrains are useful because, as Croley said, strong feeling wants a container. At least I remember words to that effect. All words mingle eventually in the same cloud. I also like Florida, the ocean more than the sun. Being in waves reminds me of something I once was and maybe will be again, but I have no idea really what I mean by that. Poem called Motion Against Ideas. As for the idea we are all one, I notice cancer has removed pieces of Robert, but I am still whole. I see a few people swimming in money, many others wading out to supply drinks and sex. The water's glassy blue, the many taken by the few, but I don't know them, don't fish, don't care. It's cool to think our skulls contain sun and moon and stars, each head a planetarium. The difference is heads switch off quick, unlike stars. A new body, all new cells every 7 years. Hell yes, why not? But new cells that make us look older? Your Honor, entropy spreads us thin and thinner, will soon be gloss. Your Honor, I move, we clear away ideas on both sides of the table and wait wordless together for as long as it takes the soul to appear, then wait longer for the maker of souls, the maker of silence, the maker of words, then listen and weep and take notes. This is a poem, obviously, for my grandfather. It's called I Poem. Someday I hope to write a poem that doesn't look back. I know everything we see and hear and feel takes a fraction of time to reach the brain, so that we live in a literal, continuous past and will never catch up to the present. I know, and the knowing has not helped me. But I think the poem I have in mind might look something like my grandfather just before he died. He was sleeping, something he did more and more, as if in training for endless dream. A small man, he lay in the billows of the hospital bed like a baby asleep on a cloud. I sat next to him, bored, impatient, anxious to get to the ecstatic and wounding parts of my own life. I was looking out the window, I think, when Poppy's top half rose up like a switchblade and his mountain lake blue eyes snapped open, as if seeing something enormous hurtling toward him. Then he lay back gently and was again asleep. Someday I hope to write a poem with that look in its eye. And I'll close with a poem called Walking Prayer. I take the dog for a walk in this very nice donated bit of land out here, donated by the Browns. And I'm very happy that we have it. Anyway, it's called Walking Prayer. Thank you for this tree line of red maple against blue, each leaf flipping over and back, sun blink. Thank you for the dark and leaf banks the sun can't reach. Thank you for this breeze that sweeps the pond so it shivers like a satisfied animal. Thank you for this animal walking behind me. I would be as devoted to you as she is to me, but I'm not. And I am sorry for the countless times I have turned away, though you have counted and know their number. How my harm ripples out, traveling through my beloveds and beyond, across this and other landscapes, until the moon itself may be pocked by my pride and disdain. Forgive my claim that any action of mine may touch the moon. I have confessed, but I forget, choosing instead to remember wrongs done me, large and small, which you know also. Thank you for the path that circles the field and skirts the river as it moves from grass and light to shaded earth, pebbles cobbled into its surface by 1,000 feet. Thank you for the river, tugs pushing their trays of coal upstream against the current. Thank you for this day, like no other. Continuous flow from the center of being. What are you that you give without ceasing? You open yourself as we fade. What is man that you pay him such mind? Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Jeffrey. One of the things that we're missing tonight without a live audience is that collective sigh that people have after poets read. They may not have been doing it on Zoom because they're all muted, but I sure felt that sense of exhale after some of your poems. So thank you so much for sharing those with us. And thanks again also to Shayla and to Michael. We're getting ready to move into the exciting part with the questions. So all three of our authors are on camera when they get to speak. So, but we have a few questions from the audience. And, but before we get to those, you know, one of the things that I think all three of you all did extremely well was emotion. There was so much emotion in tonight's readings. I felt it, and I'm sure our audience felt it. You know, the heartache, the anger, you know, there was peace in some of these, the longing, there were just so many emotions. So thank you all so much for that those readings tonight. So we'll do our questions from our audience, and I'll do a quick one with Shayla. The piece that you read, where did you say that piece is located? Did you say it was published or?
It is not. It is forthcoming in an anthology, which will be a while from now. But there are plenty of things to read in this book. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, that is a standalone essay that I wrote as you know, a girl who grew up in Kentucky, with us being in the news right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm so glad that that's going to be published, and we'll get to read that again. And for those of you all listening at home, you get to hear it again. Either on Facebook, YouTube, or eventually on WUKY as well. So you'll definitely get to hear that again. I prepared some questions, and I know our audience has some questions. And so one of the questions that we have is, when working on pieces for your most recent collections, did you start with a theme? Did you start with a character or person you wanted to write about? You know, or did you start with a story? What usually comes first for you? And since we started with Shayla, why don't we just start with you on answering that? If all three of you all, if you don't mind to answer.
Yeah, I think I always start with a question. And with This Is Major, the question was, how do we take stories about Black women that have usually been put in the Best Supporting Actress category, and how do we move them into the major narrative? So how do we think about the stories of Black women as major, and that carried out throughout the work and all those different stories that I decided to tell.
You had a lot of empowering stories in there too, and a lot of really strong words of encouragement too. So, okay. Well, Michael, how about you? What comes first for you?
I'm not as smart as Shayla, so mine was more of an accident. I kind of came to my theme later. I actually actively avoided writing about uh, being half Korean for a long time for reasons that would take too long to get into, I think. Um, but the story I read from was like a big moment in my writing life in the sense that I sort of did this thing a teacher of mine in undergrad had encouraged me to do, which was to write about being half Korean and growing up in a place like Corbin. And I think it made me realize I was always writing about identity. If I wasn't writing about necessarily racial or ethnic identity, I was always writing about identity, like male identity, masculinity, the way a place shapes us, the way we try to break free of a place, but we kind of carry that place with us. And so that's kind of how I started to see that I was always kind of doing that in my work, and that kind of helped develop a theme and sort of helped order the stories in the collection.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's parts of us that we have to write through before we can move on to the next theme and the next story. So, okay. And Jeffrey?
For me, it depends on what genre I'm writing, and I write plays, and I just finished a piece that mixes drama and essay and fiction. So I don't know what that is, but when I wrote that and when I write poetry, I just write. Whatever is going to come, I'm happy for whatever the day is. And slowly it begins to look like a book with a theme. And then I maybe nudge the poems towards that theme so that it makes a book instead of just a collection of poems. There's nothing wrong with a collection of poems, but it's nice to have a movement that is unified in it. So with a play, though, I need to know what the end is before I commit that much time and energy. I need to know a basic kind of plot. So those are the two differences for me. It's more fun writing poetry in the beginning because I don't have to know where I'm going, and part of the fun is finding out.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you were writing a novel, they would probably call you a pantser, meaning you fly by the seat of your pants. And when it comes to you, that's how it goes. Okay, so another question for you all, and this time we'll start with Michael. Who are some of the most influential writers, most influential on your work, other writers, whether they were mentors or maybe they're just authors or poets that you admired, and why did they influence you?
Yeah, I mean, he's sort of fallen out of favor, but you know, when I was a kid, I read Rabbit Run by John Updike. My brother's 6 years older than me. I think he got assigned it in a literature class at UK, and so he was reading it, so I picked it up, and that's not a book a 16-year-old should read. But there's a line early on in that book I think is quite good. Rabbit has run away from his family, and he's in the mountains of West Virginia. And he has this line, and the line is, he looked up, and the telephone wires were lassoing against the sky. And I remember being a boy and being about 8 years old and going out into the country with my dad to where he had grown up and lying down the backseat of his car and thinking that exact same thing. That it looked like the lines were whipping against the sky. And I sort of had like this, maybe the best intuition of my life, that that's what literature was really about. Like here was this guy who was not like me, was not from a place where I had grown up, and yet he and I saw the exact same thing. And I kind of got pretty intuitively that that's what really made a book literature and separated it from, you know, a genre work, I guess. I wouldn't have called it that then, of course, you know. So that was a real big influence. And then honestly, there's a story in the book called Larger Than the Sea, which is a sort of a family story about from my mom's side of the family when my grandfather had to hide from these Japanese soldiers that I wanted to tell for a long time. And when I read Min Jin Lee's Pachinko, that really, I'm not sure exactly why, but it sort of gave me the confidence to tell that story. There were some matchup points in my mom's history and sort of what goes on in that book, I think. But it allowed me to sort of be wayfaring and to write about a place I didn't really have a ton of physical connection to. And so I think those are two things that I think are important, you know, to find out what those matchup points are so you can sort of find your own way in the stream.
Very good. Thank you.
Mhm.
Jeffrey, how about you? Influencers on your writing?
Well, there were so many. I mean, I think that when I was young, I liked fiction. So I read a lot of fiction, not much poetry. I grew up in Levittown, Long Island, and my parents were not readers, so it was limited. But I read the Jungle Stories and other sort of adventure books that young boys like. And when I got older, somehow I've thought about this since then, and it's sort of strange and interesting that in my 20s and early 30s, I had time to read Dostoevsky. I seem to have no time to read those huge books anymore. You know, I read Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. I don't know what happened, but time just went away, and my attention span is not what it used to be. But I would read, tons of fiction. When I started writing poetry, I was instantly knocked out by Dylan Thomas and T.S. Eliot. Those are big influences. The music that they make is just out of this world. And so I always wanted to have music in my own poetry, and it seemed natural to me. And then I don't know. We in my generation, we read the previous generation and the one before that, and we sort of idolized many people. So there was just so many. Louise Glick was a fantastic influence on me, and Phil, and many more. Lots. I wouldn't want to give any of them up.
I understand that completely. Shayla, how about you? Mentors or just authors that have inspired you?
I mean, if we start in Kentucky, two of my earliest instructors were Crystal Wilkinson and Kelly Norman Ellis when I went through Governor's School for the Arts. So that was the first time that I was introduced to the idea that writing could be a career, that writing could be something that you do. So when I think about mentors, that's definitely where I go. In terms of reading, I started it started with poets like Phyllis Wheatley and Nikki Giovanni when I was growing up. I am consistently influenced by Toni Morrison. The book, we were closing it around the time that Toni Morrison died, so there's actually an epigraph that comes from her in the book where she mentioned the idea that racists always try to make you think that they're the majority, but they're always wrong. And that's been quite a guiding light for me in terms of advocacy and the importance of writing ourselves into this history, even at a time when we're not exactly sure who of us is, what we're all going to look like on the other side of this story. I think that that's always something that I keep in mind, is writing provides us a certain amount of power to start to influence history, to start to shape stories, to start to participate in our future. And I'm deeply indebted to the hundreds of writers that formed me and helped me to see what the future could look like.
I had a feeling you might mention Crystal because I know you were involved at Carnegie. Maybe went before she even left. She'd been working there, maybe about that time, or she might have just been teaching. I don't know which. So
yes,
wonderful.
Another
writers.
Carnegie Center legacy, Crystal Wilkinson. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, very powerful writers.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Looking at our questions, let me ask this one, and I think that for a lot of people right now, especially in the early days of the pandemic, and now there's so many things in the news that they break your heart, and or they make you angry, and everything that's going on in the world right now, especially our country. For me, I find that books are the nourishment that I need for comfort or for renewed strength. And I wondered for you all, what books have fed your soul recently? And so we'll start with Jeffrey, since he hasn't answered a question first. But what has fed your soul? Literature that's fed your soul?
I got into a jag of reading Michel Houellebecq. I don't know how to pronounce him. He's French, and a very interesting novelist, I thought. So I read like 5 of them in a row. And I'm constantly reading poetry, either going back to older stuff that I've already read, or with new stuff, looking through magazines, following up people if I'm interested. And I don't, for me, there's not been much of a difference in my reading since the pandemic. I'm impatient and I'm antsy, and I would like to get back to whatever is normal. I don't know what normal is anymore, but otherwise, pretty much my writing life is the same as it's been, and anything that's good feeds my soul.
I understand that. Okay, Shayla.
I've been reading a lot of speculative fiction. So Nidhi Okafor, Tomi Adeyemi, Octavia Butler. That's been kind of, I don't know, it's nice to see people write a future in which we exist, a future in which we're still going, especially in a time where it's very hard to imagine what the rest of the year is going to look like or what next year is going to look like. So there's something about speculative fiction that I find pretty calming right now.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I had a big stack of, well, I have several stacks of books to read, but one of them that I'd picked up at an author reading was Erin Morgenstern's The Starless Sea. And for me, I don't normally read fantasy, but for me, just getting lost in this other world, and it had to do with books, that was where I just wanted to stay. And I was actually sad when the book was over. So I've just been reading voraciously, but I completely understand that. Yeah. All right, Michael, things that you've been reading.
I'm mostly reading what I'm teaching right now. And we have small kids at home, so I don't really do much of anything except chase them around. But one book that I'm reading now with my class I like a lot is this book here by Lost Children Archive, which I find really fascinating because it's kind of like a road novel, but not really. It's kind of like about a nuclear family, but not really. Like it's a really, really smart book. And I sort of feel like she's taken these traditional archetypal stories and kind of just torqued them a little bit, like to use Spinal Tap, she's turned it up to 11 a little bit. And I find that kind of fascinating and interesting. And then I just finished, she's coming here to visit this fall virtually, but Connie Schultz, the columnist, she won a Pulitzer for commentary in 2004, but her novel is quite good, The Daughters of Erie which is about a working class family in a suburb of Northeast Ohio. And I found that to be quite good, and a good exploration of sort of, moving past your hometown, moving past your roots a little bit, and sort of feeling guilty about that. So I like, those are two books I read recently that I liked a lot. And the third one I like to mention, she's actually visiting my class tomorrow. There's a woman named Catherine Hill who wrote it's a football novel called The Short Move, but that's really dumbing down what that book's about. But I found that to be a kind of a fascinating exploration of masculinity and football culture and American culture and how those two things are tied together. And I love that it was by a woman who obviously never played football, but she does such a great job with it. And it's really snappy. And it's sort of a little bit like Shayla saying, I think a little bit about it's a very literary book, but it's also something you just get lost in and you just kind of gobble it up and go. And I think that kind of stuff has been really important during this time too. So.
Yeah, anytime a book can just pull you in completely like that, especially now, it seems to be just what's needed, the perfect remedy. So for our parting question, I'm going to be asking, it's the same question for all of you. And if you have your most recent book nearby, when you answer, hold it up and tell us, where can people go to find more about you and your writing? So Michael, you're still on the screen, so we'll just start with you.
Okay. Well, this is my book. And then you can just go to my website. I guess that'd be the easiest place to do it. michaelcroley.com. And then, I have a lot of essays I've written about in the last couple of years about being half Korean and growing up in Appalachia. And then, that'd be the easiest place to find it. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jeffrey or Shayla, whoever's ready.
Go, Shayla. I don't have a book, so.
Yeah, my book, This Is Major, Notes on Diana Ross, Dark Girls, and Being Dope, is available through HarperCollins. Easiest place to find out information about me is either my website or on social media. I'm basically on all of them. So if you look up my name, you can probably find it. I'm blue if I wasn't on Twitter and Instagram.
Okay, thanks. Jeffrey?
I don't have a copy of my book handy to hold up, but I offer this container as a selected poem, and Chance Divine is the book before that, which was published by Oberlin Press, and that's still current, sort of. So what was the other part of the question? Was there another part of the question?
Just where people can go to learn more about you. And
Oh yeah. Well, I'm on Wikipedia, but it's a woefully out of date entry. And I wrote to those guys that do the Wikipedia, and boy, they were nasty. They said, "Well, you got to provide this," and that. I said, "I didn't write this to begin with. I don't want to do that." And so that was the end of it.
Well, is it at least true? Everything that you read on me?
It's true. It's just years out of date. But yeah, you could go there, and I am on Facebook, and that's it.
Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you to all three of our readers. And I just wanted to remind our audience that you can buy their books at bookshop.org. Go to the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning's page, and we have their featured books there, but you can buy any book at bookshop.org while you're there. And thank you so much to our authors again. It was just a very inspirational evening and so many stories that need to be told. So thank you so much for that, and to our audience for coming. I hope you all have a great evening. And for those of you listening, come back on October the 29th, just exactly 1 month from today, if you count numbers. We'll be doing our next Kentucky Great Writers reading then. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you, Carnegie Center.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Shayla.
Shayla, thanks, Michael.
Thank you,
Great
Jeffrey. Thank you, Michael.
All right, good night.
See y'all.
Good night.